welcome to this discussion with Immutable and StarkWare on the future of NFTs. I'm Stephen Graves, Managing Editor of Decrypt.co, and I'm joined today by James Ferguson, CEO of Immutable, and Uri Kolodny, co-founder and CEO of StarkWare. So as you may know, Immutable is the gaming studio behind Gods Unchained, a digital trading card game that uses non-fungible tokens to create unique cards that can be purchased or traded for real-world currency. And StarkWare is bringing scalability and privacy to blockchains using zero-knowledge proofs. So turning to the immediate future of NFTs, Immutable and StarkWare are taking this opportunity to announce a new collaboration. James, would you like to share some details?
Fantastic. Thank you, Stephen. So we're really proud to be up here today to announce Immutable X. So Immutable X is the decentralized exchange we are building, which will launch this year, which will allow scalable and non-custodial exchange of ERC20 and ERC721 tokens. And obviously, as a company that is building blockchain games, we're extremely excited by this and all the benefits that it will bring us.
So, James, can you explain some of the problems that Immutable X is solving with the current state of NFTs?
Yeah, so through building Gods Unchained and through trying to build a game which is meant for mainstream appeal, so it's meant for a gaming audience, we've run into quite a lot of technical issues, which we're now very happy that we can overcome. So the big one, which is probably at the forefront of everyone's mind, is obviously scalability. So currently, Ethereum can only support about 120,000 non-fungible token trades per day at its capacity. There's more than just that, though. The next biggest one is user experience and reversion. So you can click buy, you can send the money. Sometimes it won't go through. Maybe the block was uncooled. There can be many different issues which happen. And in the end, this is a very confusing experience to people who just want to play games. And then there's a couple more on top of that. So there's privacy. All Ethereum transactions are fully public when they're on chain. There's latency, so trades can take minutes to be fully processed. And of course, there's the custody risk if you go down the centralized exchange approach, which might be one solution to try and deal with this, which is that users don't own their items fully.
Okay, that's fascinating. So for those who aren't currently familiar with StarkWare, Yuri, can you share some background on the company and your technology?
Sure. So we incorporated back in early 2018. We raised a little over $40 million, mostly from VCs, and a $4 million grant from the Ethereum Foundation. As part of that, we'll be releasing open source code this summer to the community. We build proof systems for both scalability and privacy. And specifically, we implement the Stark zero-knowledge proof system co-invented by my co-founders, Ali Ben-Sasson and Michael Ryabtsev. And that one famously has no trusted setup. So we use StarkX, which is our scalability engine, for scaling transaction throughput. We've already demonstrated back in January a throughput of almost 10,000 non-custodial trades per second on an Ethereum public testnet. And more important than that sort of raw number is the fact that we are no longer bounded by blockchain resources in terms of the scale we can employ, but rather by the magnitude of the proof machines we can deploy in the cloud. Over the past several weeks, we've completed over 20 million trades on a public testnet, an Ethereum public testnet. This is part of our upcoming launch with Diversify. And so this is all gearing us up for the very exciting launch with Immutable this summer.
So why do you guys see this as the right moment for Immutable and StarkWare to team up? Yuri?
Well, Immutable, we've found sort of a kindred spirit in Immutable. We're both young startups. James is clearly younger than I am. But we're venture-backed, we're pragmatic. There is none of the sort of the limitations that come with tokenizing the effort. But rather, we want to move fast, build something sustainable, something meaningful, and we share this vision that Ethereum is the right platform to do this. Now, historically, the gaming industry has been an early adopter of many, many new technologies, and going back decades, things like 3D graphics and content distribution networks and mobile and virtual reality. So historically, it's been a community that is always open to adopting new ideas. It's a very natural fit in that regard.
So to date, gaming has been one of the main use cases for NFTs, but games using the technology have yet to achieve mass adoption. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think trading, it opens up very exciting directions in the context of gaming that haven't really been explored in a meaningful way up till now. The ability to create liquidity for in-game assets is a super exciting direction. But in order to explore that, liquidity requires scale. And when people say scale, it's often not a well-defined term. So this is not only scale for trading, but also for things like minting of assets, which is a very fundamental need for any blockchain game, for any game.
James, would you?
And this isn't this scale issue isn't a hypothetical problem as well. So far on Ethereum in Gods Unchained, we've created over 7 million trading cards, each of which is a non-fungible token. And as we've done so, we've had to deal with high levels of risk that we could congest the entire network at multiple different times. So this idea of scaling isn't something which is a hypothetical problem for us. We are, the whole North Star of the company is to get 1 million players playing Gods Unchained, trading these assets in a way that is seamless for them. And so far, we've been hamstrung from achieving these goals because if we pour too much money into marketing, then we could crash the entire network. But that is no longer the case with Immutable X and the StarkWare technology. We've been looking for a while for a scalability solution that we would feel comfortable can give our players the user experience that they are used to after, I suppose, nothing is more seamless than currently mobile apps, right? And in order to have that large level of growth, which we're aiming for, you need to have the user experience, plus you need to have the scalability. And finally, we have the tech to have both without having any compromises.
So you mentioned tech there. Yuri, I think now's the time to go into a little more technical detail on StarkWare's solution. Can you explain a bit about how you're enabling scalability of NFT trades through zero-knowledge proofs?
Of course. So I think one thing that's very important to appreciate in the context of NFTs, that any scaling limitation that one comes across in the context of a permissionless blockchain is exacerbated when you look at NFTs. Because if I own one fungible token or 1 million fungible tokens, I consume as many resources on the public blockchain. On the other hand, with NFTs, 1 million NFTs consume 1 million times more resources than a single NFT. So that's, I think, one important sort of observation in this context. So the general concept of using zero-knowledge proofs for computation is I think, a very intuitive one. The idea is to take both computation and storage and move them off the blockchain into the cloud. And there in the cloud, you can generate proofs attesting to the integrity of that computation or to the integrity of state transitions in your storage. And the only thing you send back to the public blockchain is that proof, that Stark proof, and a commitment to the new state of affairs, accounts, etc., whatever the state that you're trying to preserve in the game. And that is in turn verified with a smart contract, dedicated smart contract on the blockchain. And there you have your scalability solution, because that verification on the blockchain consumes exponentially fewer resources than doing the native computation on Ethereum directly.
Okay, so taking a closer look at Immutable X, this is a next generation exchange for NFTs. So can you explain some of the mechanics behind how it'll work?
So Immutable X is going to roll out for Gods Unchained first, but it's not just a closed ecosystem. We're building it out to be a platform for which we can allow the trading of cards within our game. But on top of that, we have this amazing ecosystem of community websites, and many of them want to work with and provide their own different parts of a marketplace service. So we're allowing our community websites in order to work with the Immutable X platform, while also offering a deeply integrated solution chain. What does this mean? It means being able to buy specifically based on the DEX, based on the in-game context. So, after you play against someone, why not buy their deck off them? And previously, the level of friction which existed when users are trying to interact with the blockchain at every single step meant that it was a real hassle for users. And we can track the drop-off that occurs at different stages when we present this friction, and we can see exactly what will happen to our different funnels when we remove this friction as well. So we're incredibly excited to be able to offer a seamless platform which can truly allow blockchain games to be as popular as they deserve to be. And this doesn't just mean that it will be there for Gods Unchained, but for other games as well who want to use the platform, for community websites who want to support those games, and an aggregator as well for these different games. So we're extremely excited. We're going to be launching Immutable X in Q3, which I know a lot of Gods Unchained players, if they're listening to, are going to be extremely excited about.
Excellent. And you mentioned sort of scaling it out beyond to community websites and as an aggregator for immutable games. Presumably you're launching with Gods Unchained. What's the timescale for sort of branching out? Or is all of that functionality going to be available from the off?
So we get to build this out with a real use case in mind. So a game that is ready to be taken to hundreds of thousands and then 1 million players. And what's nice is this means that we don't have to speculate on what a nice use case would be. We know what matters. We know what drives up our retention rates and what our users care about and what the friction points are, and exactly what's necessary for us, the different bottlenecks we need to widen in order to achieve mainstream adoption. So for us, a couple of things we're extremely excited about is firstly, what this allows us to do, not just on the trading of assets, which is important, but on the minting of assets as well. So when we can reward players with items which they can trade for real money, so players can play to earn, this has an extremely strong effect for us on retention and user acquisition. And so unleashing this is going to be something huge for the gaming industry. Next up as well, we have the ability with this to, in a way which is finally usable for players, to be able to allow influencers and people in the distribution value chain to be rewarded for the actions they take. So if we have a popular streamer who is sending people across to Gods Unchained, or a popular community site as well, with Immutable X and the StarkWare technology, we get to guarantee them a fee. It doesn't matter in which way they access the platform. We get to make sure that the people who are contributing to the ecosystem and the people who participate in it are incentivized and rewarded for the value they bring, whether that's playing the game and you're rewarded with items, or whether it's sharing the game and sharing the ability to buy items and bringing new people into the ecosystem. We are finally unchained with our ability to do this, which is extremely exciting.
Very good. So NFTs are becoming fairly well established in the gaming space, and we've seen sort of early stage cases of adoption in other industries, for example, digital fashion. When do you expect to see a diversification of the use cases for NFTs and sort of broader adoption across industries? I'll throw this one out to either of you.
So I think that gaming works extremely well as the first use case. There are some really exciting, experiments that are happening in other ones, whether they're on the more cerebral side, like digital fashion, which is very interesting, or limited edition art. The pro that gaming has, and the reason that we think that gaming is the first, why is gaming the first thing that has hit 7 million unique non-fungible different items in one set. And that's because, one, there are a lot of gamers in the world. So there's over 2 billion people who, play games of some form. And then secondly, gamers are already used to the idea of digital items having value. And with the current free-to-play model, they're getting a pretty raw deal. So I have no doubt that in the future, if we're having this conference again in 5-10 years, we'll be talking about, synthetic derivatives on top of industries which are built on these games, or something wild where we start merging DeFi and gaming. And that's what the world will turn to. And there'll be some strange collision with art and influences and provenance all tied into one. So now our big goal is, let's get these games into the hands of people. Let's build AAA games, which people want, and let's use the best tech so that when we get it to 1 million users, we don't break the network.
So it's interesting that you mentioned sort of merging DeFi and gaming and real value being attached to tokens, because obviously as we start to see that happen, we may start to see sort of increased regulatory scrutiny coming into the space. Do you see that as a challenge, or is that something that you guys welcome?
At the end of the day, what we're trying to do, and the way we see it, is we're trying to beat bad actors. So the way in which the whole free-to-play industry currently runs is not a way that is in the player's best interest. If there's going to be, there's multiple ways that you can deal with protecting players' best interest. You can work with regulators in order to do so, or you can program within the different smart contracts and onto the blockchain in a way that you don't need to be regulated because the code isn't even in your control anymore. At the end of the day, whatever way allows us in a sustainable way to give more value to the players so that they're not just wasting their time and money and they can't be easily manipulated, that's a great future for us.
If I may interject, zero-knowledge proofs in this regard can offer sort of the best of both worlds, meaning they can satisfy the privacy needs of users and game developers and the requirements put in place by regulators. So just to take sort of a trivial notion, you could prove, for example, that you are not on some blacklist of bad actors without revealing your identity. You could prove various statements that would satisfy the regulators and yet respect the very important, the crucial needs, privacy needs of individuals.
Thanks. Yuri, assuming that the scalability issue is now resolved, what do you see as the next sort of big challenges standing in the way of mass adoption of NFTs, and how do you plan to address them?
So the most important thing in the context of adoption is making sure that these tools become widely available to developers, so that folks like James and his team, James and Alex and the rest of the Immutable team can take and code any game logic in the cloud without giving sort of a second thought to the limitations put in place by Ethereum. And those tools are not in place yet, working hard to develop those tools. And once they are there, I think we'll see a huge surge in applications and demand for the promise of public blockchains.
James, you mentioned earlier influencers and rewarding people in the distribution value chain. Is that something that's going to launch with the platform in Q3, or is that something that you're looking to roll out later?
So our current plans for this are later this year to allow influencers to be able to take a cut of when they share value, they can partake in that value. So something which is very interesting about non-fungible tokens is that each of the tokens tracks its history. So if an influencer has played with it before, that is attached to the item. And players care about that in the same way that sports fans care about sports memorabilia.
Fantastic. And I guess if you guys had one key message to take away from the arrival of Immutable X, what would it be?
James, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. So we have spent a long time looking at different scalability solutions. Normally you hear the word scalability solution and you're working between compromises. But at the end of the day, there are a couple of things that you can't compromise. You don't want to be compromising the user experience. You don't want to be compromising the scale. So if a popular game has 1 million players, a very popular game can have 50 million players in it. And we need to have a system that can handle all different levels of scale. Finally, you don't want to compromise centralization. There's more reasons than just like ethical reasons on this one and principles. There's regulatory issues as well around that. And then finally, you don't want to compromise privacy either. Finally, with Immutable X and with StarkWare together, we've worked out a way that we can take this technology and use it for non-fungible tokens in a way that our players are desperate for. So this is a tech which we're confident will allow us to create games which change the way that games are played and change the level of blockchain adoption extremely dramatically.
And Yuri, presumably this isn't the only application for this scaling solution. Do you see many more NFT exchanges springing up in the next year or several?
I have no doubt that there will be additional players coming into the NFT space. So gaming and other applications, I think it's just way too exciting, this notion of digital scarcity for folks to sit on the sidelines and just observe. I'm sure that in addition to Immutable's effort, I'm sure that other people will want to bring new games, perhaps existing franchises into the space. And of course, there's all sorts of exciting stuff happening with DeFi. And there too, scalability is a very important thing. And we've come, over the span of 2 years, we've come from a scientific paper to a software stack and a service that's ready for the very demanding needs of gods and chain.
Fantastic. I think that's wrapped up all of our questions. I'm just going to check the Ethereal Summit's Twitter feed to see if anyone's weighed in on there. But it does not look like anyone has any questions on there. I think that brings us to a close with a couple of minutes on the clock. So I'd just like to say thank you very much to my panelists, James Ferguson from Immutable and Yuri Kolodny from StarkWare. Please check out our coverage of the event on decrypt.co and look forward to seeing you guys soon.
Thank you.
Fantastic.